too dark to get a white balance. It's too dark to get a shot.
You know what? I think about it.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'd like to start because one of our presenters, the Honorable Dudley Goodland, has, well, he is honorable. He has, fortuitously, he has to give a speech at 8 o'clock upstairs, so thank goodness it's not 8 o'clock at Fort Myers. Quickly, before we begin, I'm going to have Jim McLaughlin give us a morning prayer, because they're always so beautiful, and pledge allegiance, and then we'll have Dudley, and then I'll introduce guests and give Jennifer a moment to speak. So, Jim?
Thank you, Kathleen. My prayers aren't always beautiful, but I think those that I take from the book No Atheists in Foxhole, which is the book by our son, Commander Patrick McLaughlin, which spells out from the time he was chaplain to the president for 3 years and his 2 terms in Iraq, and other things. And I've chosen his morning prayer today. His reflections, quotes, reflections, and prayers is what the book is. You want to rise? Because we're going to do the pledge right after this. Oh God, for this new day we give thanks. We ask for stamina, faithfulness, hope, wisdom, power. We promise loyalty, respect, commitment, creativity, exuberance. With your unfailing support, our efforts and accomplishments are unlimited. We work together to glorify you and for our country today. Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
By the way, any bookstore, Amazon.com, it'll put my grandchildren through college.
I called Dudley's law partner to get a bio of him, and the fax is still going because it's so large. And everybody knows Dudley. He's responsible for the constitutional amendments. He served on the commission that actually created them, and he's got a great, not only a great story to tell, but I think it's really important that we listen to him, because no one I know knows how to vote on the amendment. So without any further ado, Dudley, it's up to you. You have, 15, 20 minutes, whatever you want.
Thanks very much. It's always a pleasure to have a chance to visit with the Tiger Bay. This is a little different venue than when I was last at Tiger Bay. I think we were at the Oaks Club or somewhere else. But anyway, what I wanted to spend a few minutes talking with you about this morning is the constitutional amendments that you will find on the ballot. I just happened to wear my I voted because to remind everyone, you don't have to wait till November the 4th to vote. You can, if you haven't already done so, you can do so today or tomorrow or even over the weekend now. Our governor has extended the time for early voting. I think but before I get into the constitutional amendments that you will find on the ballot, and there are 6, I thought it'd be a good, important to maybe just take a minute to give you an overview of our Constitution on the one hand, and how the Constitution can be amended under the laws of the state of Florida. As you may know, the first Constitution that we had in the state of Florida was in 1838, which preceded the Florida becoming a statehood. We didn't become a state until March the 3rd of 1845. So we had a Constitution to prepare us for statehood, and then we had 4 other constitutions after 1838, and I won't get into all of those, except one of them was never actually, we never became the law, the Constitution of 1865, because we were under military law during that time, and so the Constitution never took effect. But we fast forward to 1968 is the Constitution that we're now governed by in the state of Florida. So those of you who are quick at math know that Constitution we now have is 40 years old. And one of the things that you have an opportunity to do, if you haven't already voted by November the 4th, is to review and vote on the 6 constitutional amendments. Well, there are 5 separate ways that constitutional amendments can find their way onto a ballot for the citizens of the state of Florida to have an opportunity to speak to. One of those is by a joint resolution of the House and the Senate. So that a resolution that's passed by 3/5 vote in the House and 3/5 vote in the Senate is a joint resolution that finds its way directly onto the ballot. It's not subject to any kind of a single subject limitation. It's not subject to any kind of a number of words in the ballot summary limitation. It finds its way directly to the ballot. The only thing it is subject to review, is not subject to review. So, and the reason I mentioned that is because the first amendment that will be on the ballot that you will face, which is amendment number 1, was placed on the ballot by the Florida legislature. The Senate voted 40-0 to put it on the ballot, and there are only 40 members of the Senate. And the House voted 83-31 to put that on the ballot. And basically that is a provision which repeals the alien land law. Now what that does, ladies and gentlemen, is if you vote for that, it merely takes a sentence out of the state constitution that, if left in, permits the legislature to pass a law that prohibits non-citizens, people who are not eligible for citizenship, to own property. And this merely takes that provision out. There's the scholars who have looked at this issue, and those who, at least the Senate analysis that was done for the state Senate when they passed this in 2007, and Senator Saunders may be able to answer more specific questions about this, and the House analysis done by the House staff indicates that based upon some United States Supreme Court law back in the late 1930s, that this provision, if the legislature were to enact any law that said that a person not eligible for citizenship could not own land, it would be unconstitutional. So that's one of the reasons that the legislature wants to take that train wreck, potential train wreck, if you will, out of the Constitution. That's what amendment number 1 is. Another way, a second of the 5 ways to amend the state constitution, is by a citizens petition initiative. And the second amendment that's on the ballot, amendment number 2, is on the ballot because by way of a citizens petition initiative. And what the law in Florida requires for a citizens initiative petition to be placed on the ballot is it has to have signatures on it equal to 8% of the people who voted in the last presidential, the last presidential election. And the 8% can't come from one area of the state. It has to be divided between at least half of the congressional districts. So the 8% of the people who voted in the last presidential election, is 611,000 people had to sign, and whose signatures are verified by our supervisor of elections on the petition that's before you, the marriage petition, to say that marriage is between one man and one woman. That language is on the ballot because it had the necessary signatures, and it did pass the review that the court. And let me digress for another minute. The Citizens Petition Initiative is limited in some respects. Not only must those signatures be gathered that I just mentioned, but it cannot contain more than one subject. A citizen petition can't be more than one subject. It has to be summarized with a title that does not exceed 15 words, which is the words that are on the ballot that you will see or have seen. And it has to have a ballot summary of not more than 75 words. So those are strictures placed upon a citizens petition initiative. And the one that's before you now has complied with all of those strictures. It has been reviewed by the Florida Supreme Court. The Florida Supreme Court doesn't review it to determine whether it's lawful or unlawful. They merely review it for the limited purpose of determining is the ballot title and the summary misleading, or does it accurately say what the amendment would do if it passes. So I'm not going to, you probably formed your own opinion, and I'm not here to advocate on for or against the amendments, but that's how amendment number, that's the subject matter, and that's how it found its way to the ballot. Now, the last 4 of the 6 constitutional amendments that are on the ballot are there because they are placed there by the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission. The Constitution of 1968 provided for the 5 ways, this is the 3rd way, to amend the Constitution. And in Article 6, Section 9 of the state Constitution, there's a provision that says that every 20 years, a Taxation and Budget Reform Commission will be put together, and it's comprised of 25 members. 11 of those are appointed by the governor. 7 of those are appointed by the presiding officer of the Senate President, and 7 of those are appointed by the Speaker, the presiding officer of the Florida House. Those 25 people then meet and have been meeting from March of 2007 and through April of 2008. That group met all over the state. They had a total, considered a total of 70 constitutional proposals or statutory recommendations. And unfortunately, time probably not going to permit me to get into the detail of how they operate. But what that commission did was they advanced a total of 7 proposals to be considered by the voters. The Florida Supreme Court, which has a review of a portion of what the Taxation and Budget Review Commission does, took 3 of those measures off the ballot. They removed them from the ballot, saying that one of them was that the ballot summary was misleading, that because it was a tax swap, we were going to trade a property tax for a sales tax and a potential increase in sales tax exemptions and the possibility of imposing a tax on services and a lot of details I don't need to dwell on because that issue is not on the ballot. The court took it off, saying that it was misleading, that the ballot summary was misleading. Now let me tell you that the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission, the 25 members, in order for a proposal to reach the ballot, and it goes directly to the people, it doesn't go to the legislature for review, it is subject to review by the courts for the limitation of whether or not it's misleading or whether or not the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission exceeded its authority in placing something on the ballot. And in order for one of those measures to pass, and these 4 that are before you that I mentioned briefly, they require affirmative vote of 17 of the 25 members of the commission. So if you are not able to get 17 members of that commission to vote for something, it will not go on the ballot. Separate and apart from constitutional proposals, as I mentioned, there are 4 that we're going to talk about. The Taxation and Budget Reform Commission can also advance what's called statutory recommendations. Statutory recommendations merely requires a majority vote. So 13 of the 25 members of the commission can send forward statutory recommendations. And I'll get back to that because it becomes relevant when we talk about the next constitutional amendment, which is amendment number 3. But before I get there, I said to you that there were 7 that the measures that the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission advanced. 1 was taken off the ballot because they said that it was misleading, that the ballot summary was misleading. 2 were taken off of the ballot, and those had to do with church and state, with vouchers. The Florida Supreme Court indicated that the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission, under the Constitution, simply didn't have the authority to advance those measures because they were not closely linked enough with the budget process to be considered by the voters. That was something that should be left to another way in our Constitution of amending our Constitution is a Constitution Revision Commission. Pat Barton served on a Constitution Revision Commission in 1998. It meets every 20 years, alternating 20 years with the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission. So suffice it to say, an opinion rendered by the Florida Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago that took those other 2 measures off the ballot basically suggested that if you're going to go to the lengths of getting into vouchers and religious issues, that really was beyond the scope of what the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission should have been doing. Whether you agree with that or not, that's what the opinion was, and the opinion of the court was unanimous. Now let me come back to the four issues that are on the ballot from the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission. The first one of those is a hurricane hardening and energy efficiency measure. And it was placed, I think it received a unanimous vote of the members of the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission. And basically what that does is it says, if it passes, it says that the legislature shall adopt certain procedures and rules whereby peoples whose homes are hardened to ensure that they're more well protected from hurricanes, and or homes that are made more energy efficient, any and all of the improvements made to harden the home or to make it more energy efficient are not subject to taxation. In other words, the property appraiser cannot increase the assessed value of your property because you have placed those improvements on the property. Now, and I digress, because what the legislature, what the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission did was we drafted a statutory recommendation that fills in the details of what we believe the legislature should do in defining hurricane hardening and in defining energy efficiency, so that doesn't become a free-for-all in the legislative process. What the legislature does with our recommendation is merely that. It was a recommendation. They can look at it and say, yeah, the TVRC got it right, or they can say, no, they got it all wrong, we'll do it a different way. But nonetheless, the constitutional proposal stands on its own. And if that passes, then it becomes incumbent upon the legislature by 2010 to pass the laws that will identify exactly what tax breaks exist for what hardening and what energy efficiency measures. That's amendment number 3 on the ballot. Amendment number 4 on the ballot is a conservation measure, and it's a little more complicated because it comprises 2 separate subjects. And one of the things that the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission is not subject to the single subject requirement of a citizen petition initiative, but it is still subject to the 15-word ballot title and the 75-word ballot summary. Well, what the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission had 2 separate proposals on conservation lands. One was if people, owners of land, want to set their land aside and make it and dedicate it to in perpetuity to conservation, they could do that. And that was one constitutional proposal. Another constitutional proposal, and that passed, by the way, by a large majority vote. Another constitutional proposal that was considered was to permit people to set aside land for conservation purposes, and while it was set aside for those purposes, it would be assessed based upon the character of its use. And that measure also received the necessary 17 votes, and then the Commission combined those 2 measures. Well, there were some members of the Commission who voted for one of those, but against the second one, because they felt, I can tell you Sandy Dallenberg, who was in that category, felt as though the in perpetuity had enough certainty, that there wasn't a way to dodge and dart and sort of sneak in the back door, if you will, on that one. But setting aside land for a period of time and it being assessed based upon character of use was like an agricultural zoning characterization and was subject to some potential abuse. Be that as it may, those measures are together on the ballot as amendment number 4. So when you vote, you will be voting, and again, understand that each of those measures contemplates that the legislature will come back and by 2010 draft legislation to implement those constitutional amendments if they pass, and this one is no exception. So that has to do with conservation that's perpetually dedicated, as well as separately conservation land that's going to be used for conservation purposes, but the limitation of its assessed value is based upon the character of its use at that time, but does not preclude it from a later time from being converted to a different and non-conservation use. The fourth, amendment number 6, which is the third of the 4 from the Taxation and Budget Reform, is what's called a marine, hold on a second, it's called Working Waterfronts, thank you, Bert. It's called the Working Waterfronts Amendment. And that what it basically does is it again says that the property appraiser in each of the 67 counties is limited to assessing working waterfronts. And those are basically shipyards, bait shops, marinas. They're limited to assessing those based upon they're not permitted to assess those at their highest and best use. And what has occurred in some parts of the state is marina property, waterfront property that's provided access to the boating public and the public at large, have been sold and privatized, sold to condominium associations, etc. All of a sudden, that property that was formerly a marina is now is privately owned, and people's access to the waterways is more restricted. And furthermore, the value of that property has increased exponentially as a condominium versus a bait shop. And so the thrust of this constitutional amendment, the proponents of it, basically it would restrict the value at which property appraisers can assess these working waterfronts. And again, language is left to the legislature to define those working waterfronts if this passes. And maybe after I have to sneak out someone else, maybe Bert, you could comment more on that, but that's basically the thrust of that constitutional amendment, a working waterfront. And again, it has to do with property tax assessments. And the last of the amendments, the fourth one that was placed on the ballot by the Taxation Budget Reform, and it's number 8 on the ballot that you will be looking at. Again, number 5, 7, and 9 were taken off. That's why you get this the numbers here. But number 8 merely says, and it's primarily educational funding. It says that if any area if the voters in any area want to impose a sales tax to support community colleges in that community college service area, they can do so. In other words, all this constitutional amendment does is permits local governments to put to the voters a referendum to impose a sales tax for the purpose of supporting the community college system. There are a couple of caveats. First is that it is subject to a 5-year limitation. If it passes, even if this constitutional amendment passes, and the local voters pass a measure to impose a sales tax, the sales tax must sunset after 5 years. That's one thing. Number 2, if of the 28 community colleges in Florida, 16 of those have multi-county jurisdictions. For example, Edison State College now, formerly Edison Community College, has a 5-county service area: Collier, Lee, Charlotte, Glades, and Hendry counties. If this constitutional amendment passes, then all 5 of those counties must pass a referendum to impose a sales tax, or it cannot be collected. In other words, it can't be a sales tax could pass in Collier County, but unless a sales tax passes in each of the other 4 counties in that service area, then that tax cannot be imposed pursuant to the terms of this constitutional proposal. So that's what amendment number 8 is. It basically permits, if it passes, it permits local governments to establish by a process whereby the voters can vote on whether or not they want to tax themselves. The one thing that I think is frequently not pointed out is there's no limitation on the amount of sales tax that could be imposed. There's obviously a limitation of what the voter, what the traffic will bear, what the voter would vote on, but it doesn't say a penny or 2 pennies or 3 pennies. It says that local government may impose a sales tax. It could be a penny, 5 pennies, 12 pennies, whatever. So anyway, that's what number 8 is on the ballot. And I hope I have not confused you more than, but enlightened you in some respect, both as to how those amendments found their way on the ballot and a little bit about about their substance.
Quickly
Yes.
tell us what your role was in this.
Oh, my role was special counsel to the chairman on the rules and the policy and the procedures. I wasn't the person who drafted what the Supreme Court said didn't meet muster, but I must tell you, I was a little surprised when the court did what the court did. But I did have some. I did have some role in the policy component, and we had some significant discussions at the commission on whether 5 and 7, the two that the court said that were beyond the authority or the jurisdiction of taxation and budget reform because they dealt with opportunity scholarships and vouchers. We did have a lot of debate and discussion at that level as to whether or not the taxation and budget reform should be advanced in those.
You were appointed by the governor.
No, I was merely hired. I was actually hired. It's a one-time everything. By the chairman to be his special counsel. So I did that, served in that capacity for about 6 months. Thanks for your time. I'm sorry. I'd like to stay longer, but I got to